I recently finished playing Saints Row the Third, the first game in the series I have ever played, and even though I wasn't familiar with the previous backstory for what goes on, it had a story that kept me interested on its own, with characters I grew to love. The game also certainly offers plenty of varied content to keep you wanting to play more and more, and I quickly put in plenty of hours. However, as I was playing, I couldn't help but think that there were some ways that Saints Row 3 has almost too much content. Now, that might sound strange in a world where it's far more likely a game will be criticized for not having enough content. Too short a story, not enough to do post-game, not enough variety. Saints Row 3 has a good story length, lots to do outside of that story, and keeps gameplay fresh with a lot of variety. But that's exactly the potential issue I found. This game has so much variety in its gameplay that I wonder if there's a bad lack of focus or consistency. In this video, I want to talk through a few of the different mission types in Saints Row 3 to explore which parts I think could be unnecessary, often because they conflict with the story we are supposed to be living out. I'm not going to compare this to any other Saints Row game, and I'm not going to be analyzing the good and bad in the story itself or the game as a whole, but purely some of the missions and their questionable inclusion. But this is not only going to be a critique, as I'm also going to try and look at these things in a positive way as well at the end of the video. So stick around if you want to hear both my negative and positive perspectives on the gameplay in Saints Row the Third. To begin, I have to start by explaining the story of the game, as that adds the very important backdrop for what you actually do. Gameplay has to make sense with story, right? For example, in Assassin's Creed 2, you kill people because you want to avenge your family and stop the bad guys from amassing power. Even side missions outside of that make sense. Ezio was a good guy, so of course he would take his time to help defend a woman or collect feathers in memory of his brother. It would make less sense with the story if Ezio could spend his time gardening or pillaging innocent villages. No, the gameplay all makes sense for the character and the story. So, what's Saints Row 3 about? What is it that should lead and reflect the gameplay? Well, this is a GTA-style open-world game all about committing gang crime in a somewhat goofy world slathered with the color purple. You play as a character of your own design called the Boss, who leads a criminal gang known as the 3rd Street Saints. Since the events of the previous game, the Saints have pretty much taken over their hometown of Stillwater and gained worldwide renown and fandom. They've used this opportunity to relax a lot more, earning more money from endorsing products than they have from committing crime. However, you are soon attacked by a group of opposing gangs known as the Syndicate, who kill one of your friends and take over Stillwater. Now relocated to the town of Steelport, the Saints vow to get revenge on the Syndicate and take over their new town, changing their focus back to being hardened criminals instead of soft sellouts to the commercial industry. This is where the main aspects of gameplay come in. Killing members of your enemy gangs with guns and tanks and helicopters, stealing whatever other weapons or vehicles you might need along the way. It makes sense for you to shoot rival gangs or steal, and make lighthearted comments while running pedestrians over, because you're a criminal who seems to enjoy murder and mayhem, with little care towards the aftermath of what happens, unless, of course, it would hurt your friends. So all the main story missions all pretty much play out as you would expect them to from that. Robbing a bank, destroying enemy property, humiliating your enemies, killing cops and anyone else who dares get in your way. Where things make less sense is when you start looking at the missions that exist a little farther outside the main plot. Missions that are still required to move the story forward, but are less active in the tale of the Saints' revenge. These are often missions that are an initial introduction to different types of optional side quests. For example, near the beginning of the game, Pierce gives you quests to buy real estate to make money on the side, or to participate in smaller gang fights that can be found around the map. But though there are missions like that that make perfect sense, later types of side quests fail to be quite so reasonable, which made it feel dissonant to me. So let's talk about Angel's series of missions, which act just like Pierce's, to introduce types of side quests you can do on your own. While Pierce's were set up as advice on how to succeed, the setup here is that Angel tells the player that they need to train to get stronger if they want to take down the big baddies. Okay, sounds great. So are we gonna do some practice fighting, or... Oh. No, we're going to commit insurance fraud. This could make sense in some ways. You're a criminal who will do just about anything to get more cash. Why not by flinging yourself in front of moving vehicles for insurance fraud? But at this point in the game, you're probably making a lot of money through that aforementioned real estate. So wasting your time injuring yourself for lawsuits seems non-productive when you're busy, doing important stuff like avenging one of your closest homies. More importantly, insurance fraud doesn't make sense with how it is introduced. Angel says that the player needs to do it to experience pain and get stronger from it. I get that the game is silly and random at times, but I find it hard to believe that this character would tell their friend to risk death in order to become tougher. However, I'm at least more willing to suspend my disbelief towards the insurance fraud than I am towards one of Angel's other missions to toughen you up. Tiger Escort, where he makes you drive a tiger around the city. The whole point is to just drive the cat around and not make it angry by crashing into things, or it'll scratch you. Unlike fraud, this isn't excusable as something you might try anyway, since there is no payoff. And moreover, it's a very strange concept as a way of training your strength and tenacity, and it doesn't fit in with the world when there are no wild animals like this anywhere else. Besides, like a cartoon tiger. But let's finish this section off, because Angel's other quest is trailblazing, where you ride a flaming ATV and have to race to the finish line while running people over to earn more time. Sure, the boss doesn't seem to care about hurting people for fun, but he trusts this guy he barely knows to set him on fire for a test? Again, I get the game is goofy and random. It's mindless entertainment at times, and that's totally fine. But I don't see a good excuse for any of Angel's missions, which doesn't match with how a lot of the other goofiness in Saints Row 3 does have a great excuse. So I do want to touch on those soon as comparison, so you can see why I have so much more of an issue with these. But first, next let's go to Zemos' series of missions, which again, introduce different types of side quests. Zemos is a pimp, and his missions involve driving around clients through escort quests or protecting his workers from other gangs in snatch quests. These make sense in some ways, as Zemos is likely making money for you, so you would want to do things to help keep his business running. However, it feels like another character contradiction. The player often seems uninterested in going along with Zemos' plans, but always does them anyway. Why? We're the boss of this gang and shouldn't have to do anything we don't want to. So why do we become the errand boy when anyone else could simply drive people around the city? You don't get the sense that the boss is just a selfless person who does this out of the kindness of his heart. Sure, he'd do anything to save his friends or get his business done, but he enjoys being in charge and gets angry when anyone tries to mess with that. And I'm supposed to believe he'll take time out of his day for someone else's irrelevant chore? But I do feel like maybe inconsistency in the boss's character is understandable, when this is a character that anyone can design however they like, and will likely project their own made-up personalities onto. And I guess if the personality you want is outfit I should probably wear out, or toilet, you can even do that. Yeah, there's so many crazy random things in here that by the time Burt Reynolds turns out to be the mayor and you have to fight off zombies, you don't even feel surprised anymore. And I'm not saying that it's wrong to make a game this way. In fact, I think it's fun to have a game that constantly subverts your expectations, almost changing genres completely at times. But that needs to work alongside your previously established context. Like, you probably wouldn't put a dancing minigame in the middle of a gritty survival story unless you had a strong reason for it. Because a weak reason would make people think you're making the game into a joke. So here's some good examples of Saints Row 3 being random and goofy, but being far more justifiable. Like Professor Genki's super ethical reality climax, a cartoony but violent game show that the player can compete in. While I argued that I don't find it quite so reasonable that the boss would waste time earning money from insurance fraud, and that sounds like the same would apply to participating in a game show, here it makes more sense because, 1, the boss surely enjoys hurting other people for cash more than hurting himself for it, and 2, forget about the prize money. We know that the Saints have been enjoying fame and likely want more. Why not take any opportunity to get TV airtime for your brand? That same logic goes for both the DLC and any missions where you star in a sci-fi film. They work just fine as an excuse for the developers to put space guns in the game because we've been introduced to the idea of the Saints potentially starring in movies throughout the entire story. And the game even starts off with Star Wars-style scrolling text, so you can't say it comes out of nowhere when you reach the end and there's an I am your father moment in a space movie. Another better example of a somewhat random mission style that is well justified is the hacker character Kinsey's side missions, which ultimately lead to the fight against one of the other gang leaders, Matt Miller. These take place in a cyber world that doesn't fit in with the rest of the game, but it's justified because it's a creative representation of taking down someone's network, and because Matt is also a hacker who hides behind his tech. The best way to defeat him is symbolically, through a computer simulation video game avatar battle against him. It would make less sense if these missions existed because Kinsey was just like, hey, try out this cool simulation for fun. Because we see that the boss has no interest in technology, and Kinsey is antisocial. The way they introduce this unique gameplay makes sense, at least far more than driving a tiger around in a convertible to test your strength, right? And when we do have these crazy things that still make sense, the ones that don't feel like unnecessary padding. I do like some of the questionably written missions though, so I'm more likely to forgive those, like I have a lot of fun with the escort missions. But on the other hand, I dislike the watered down tiger escort version, so when that version also makes less sense logically, I have to wonder why it was included in the game in the first place. Here's the ultimate question. Is Saints Row the Third wrong for forcing in random mission types that make little sense for the story? Or is it admirable for making as diverse gameplay as possible, while still at least trying to make the scenarios plausible, even if the excuses are weak? Because at least this is the kind of lighthearted game that you can easily do this sort of thing in. Again, I can use Assassin's Creed 2 as a counterexample. There's no way that game could get away with a random zombie mission, because even though the game features humor at times, it's trying to be as serious and realistic as possible. The opening of Saints Row 3 proves that it's nothing like that. It's over the top, it's ridiculous, it has an actor robbing a bank with a gang so he can practice for an action movie role. And there's why it's almost hard to try and critically analyze this game, because it clearly believes itself that anything goes. Instead of just making you drive a tiger around at random, at least it tries to give it purpose in the story, even if it's not a very good one. So I think there's ups and downs in all of this. Overall, I think that the game doesn't even need all of the side quests since the game is so fun without them, and there would still be a lot of content if you got rid of just one or two of the worst offenders. But I understand it's an open-world game that wants you to keep having things to do, and its online co-op mode also lends itself to having more things to do with your friends. In conclusion, as much as it frustrates me that there is a lack of focus in these certain modes of gameplay that often contradict what we see elsewhere, I think that Saints Row 3 should at least be praised for attempting to bring logic to the crazy things they make you do. And if you really dislike them, you only have to do them once each unless you want 100% completion, so that's nice. It's interesting to look at this from both perspectives, criticizing the break in immersion, but also praising the creativity behind these moments, and also the effort put in to explain it. I still really like this game, even if I can find faults with it. And this sort of inconsistency isn't even that much of an issue compared to things like bad AI every once in a while. It's totally up to the individual player whether they have fun with the random missions or not, and again, I think Saints Row 3 is kind of admirable for it. They just want you to have fun, and sometimes realism is overrated, right? So thanks for watching. I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you played the game, did these missions seem a little too out of the blue for you? Or do you think that they're great additions, and you wouldn't want to play the game without them? Is Saints Row 3 too crazy, or not crazy enough? I hope to hear from you, and I hope you have a very groovy day, my friends.